And as Puexel mentioned earlier, the art in this game is really, really fantastic. And I don't know if you guys will be able to hear it, but the music is also pretty great as well.
They'll be able to hear a soundtrack playing, but unfortunately we won't have direct game feed because we don't have access to that at the moment.
Well, yeah. You guys know to look it up later. So one thing to note at the very start there, there's two difficulties you can play on. There's a casual, quote-unquote casual or normal difficulty, and the expert difficulty. We'll be playing on the normal difficulty. Expert's not too different. It just involves a little bit more grinding, and it's not too exciting. And
yeah, when I played this, all I saw was casual and expert. It's like, wait, casual? That must mean easy mode. And then, yeah, playing this on expert for blind was a little rough at times.
So the introduction to this story, the main character is Aurora, that small red-headed girl. The premise is she and her father are. Her father is a duke in Austria. At some point, her mother passes away, and her father decides to remarry. And then one night, after Easter, all of a sudden, Aurora dies herself. Her father, of course, grieves over this, but the next day, Aurora wakes up in this mysterious land.
Nice. Nice.
Oh, I missed the sign there.
It said "Hello, Speed Gaming 3."
It's
probably worth pointing out too that this intro cutscene is oh no, said hi to the commentators too. This opening cutscene is unskippable, and I believe there is some quote-unquote randomness as far as how long it takes per run too.
Yeah, the loading times in this game are a little inconsistent. Even if you have running on the same PC, sometimes load will take 5 seconds, sometimes 10 seconds. So when I was really grinding down a time, I really wanted to make sure my introduction loading time was a little on the short side. And it's worth pointing out that caeshura does speak English. She runs when she does speedruns, she does it in English. Just she lives in Japan and is a fluent Japanese speaker.
She is from the United States originally, but lives and works in Japan.
So Aurora wakes up in this mysterious land. So at the very start of this game, you don't really get told much. So you're just kind of running and jumping. There is a little bit of optimization that we can do here. And you can see caeshura is just spamming jump. And what she's trying to do is when Aurora lands on the ground, she kind of stumbles. But if you are able to jump immediately as she lands, you can kind of ignore that little bit of stumble animation. So it's just a way to keep your horizontal movement speed. It's not something we have to do for too long, as we'll get into about 10 minutes.
Yeah. And now she just meets the kind of secondary protagonist of the game, Igniculus, who's kind of a firefly spirit. And part of what kind of makes the gameplay of this game kind of unique as far as action-ish RPGs go too, just because I'm assuming she's playing with a mouse and keyboard, which is the generally the recommended way to speedrun this game, and she's was it using keyboard for Aurora and mouse for Igniculus?
That's right. You can opt to, and some people do opt to use controller, where the right joystick would control Igniculus and the left joystick would control Aurora.
Right, that's what my experience was when playing this, and it was still a lot of fun. But I can definitely see how using a mouse is a better idea for a speed run, just because you've got a lot more precision control over Igniculus that way.
Speaking of precision control, one of the things that Igniculus will do when you control him, you have to solve these little puzzles that usually involve some sort of light and shadows. As Igniculus is this firefly, and you can activate him to just light him up. So having precise accuracy over what you're doing with Igniculus is pretty important, and even during battle, he plays an important function as well. So this being an RPG, you're probably pretty familiar with how many people are familiar with how like ATB systems work. At the start of this first battle, that's kind of an introduction, you'll see an ATB bar at the bottom, and that will show you all the characters and enemies that are when their turns are going to come up, and when they reach that red bar, it's time to take the turn. Ooh, nice crit.
Mm-hmm. I haven't played the game myself, but the other RPG I've heard compared to this game the most for the battle system is Grandia.
Right, so Grandia had a system very similar to, I think they used a wheel instead of a bar, where you could see whose turn is coming up and what enemy is coming up. And an important thing that we'll eventually get to see is when, so when you get to the red part, it's time to take your action. Certain actions take shorter or longer to actually perform. And if you happen to get hit, or if anything gets hit while they're trying to perform an action, after they selected their action but that action hasn't resolved, they'll end up getting interrupted, and so the action will cancel and they'll kind of get pushed back on the ATB bar, and they'll have to redo kind of start their turn over again.
Yeah, and then both preventing that from happening to you and then doing it to enemies in some battles is a heavy part of the strategy for the game.
Something else to note, I mentioned Aniculus does serve a purpose in battle. So he can do two things in battle. If you hover over an enemy and then activate him and shine the light on an enemy, it kind of, I guess, bothers the enemy, it like blinds them, and it'll slow down their how quickly their ATB generates.
Yeah. I don't think we'll be seeing it too much in this run, but you can also shine Igniculus on Aurora and then later other characters that join you in order to regenerate their hit points.
Ideally, yeah, it shouldn't be something we have to do too much, because if you're playing well, you shouldn't really need to heal that in that manner too often.
Because it is fairly slow-paced healing that way.
It's a pretty slow heal, but it can definitely help out in a pinch, especially if you know exactly how much damage something can do, and it can just sometimes put you right over taking lethal damage.
And then I don't know if we already talked about Igniculus's uses outside of battle too, but you can shine on enemy, because there aren't any random encounters in this game. All of the non-boss enemies, kind of like a game like Chrono Trigger, you can see them right on the field, and then touching them initiates a battle. But if you shine Igniculus on an enemy, that will kind of make them recoil, and you can pass through them without triggering an encounter. And then Igniculus can also pick up items to certain types.
Something else that we didn't note, but all the non-forced encounters, the non-boss encounters, we've already finished them for the whole run. For the remainder of the run, it's essentially just going to be a boss rush. And coming up here, we have our first little bit of like real speed tech. So this puzzle you're supposed to solve by pushing the box all the way down, and then there's going to be some switches ledge that you have to jump on. But as you can see, nice. By placing the box in a very precise precision and then doing a few precise jumps in a very particular manner, you're able to just jump onto that ridge to the light. Pretty good that she got it in the first try. Sometimes, even if you're well practiced, it can take a few tries.
Yeah, because I mean, if you push the box off of that platform, you can't do it, basically.
Yeah, you can't. You have to push it right.
You kind of want to err on the conservative side, and if you don't push it far enough, you won't be able to make the jump.
Right.
And it saves like what, 20-ish seconds to
something
get that
like
first
that.
Try.
So, Caeshura manages to pick up that. Well, I'll talk about Starlights later on, but she manages to pick up an item which you're not supposed to pick up until after this first boss fight. I never really understood how she is able to do it, but we'll talk about Starlights or Stardusts in a little bit. But right now we have our first boss fight coming up. But before we do so, we have another little light puzzle to solve, where we just shined color lights onto the crystals of the same color.
I really do like the way they build up this fight too, both visually and musically too, because I think as you each time you solve part of the puzzle here, it starts kind of building the boss theme for the first time you hear it.
Yeah. So this is the first fight where you really have to pay attention to making sure you're interrupting enemies. There's 2 statues. We want to kill the one in the on the right side first. It's kind of like the buffer. It has a speed up and a heal it does, so it's kind of annoying. The one on the left is more the attacker. And looks like she has to take a turn where she basically just defends. Ideally, she would be able to kill the right statue before it's ever able to take a turn. And at this point, she should be able to keep the fight under control just by...
Yeah, it's pretty much a stun lock at this point, because as long as she's kind of shining Igniculus on the statue just enough to manipulate its ATB, she'll just keep interrupting it when it's preparing its next attack, and it'll never actually do anything before she wins.
Something else to note, there are these flowers that you see that she hovers Igniculus over. Those are called wishes, and one important thing, a very important game mechanic that you have to pay attention to as a top runner is you have to manage the light meter. And the light meter is basically dictates what you can do with Igniculus. If you run out of light meter, Igniculus can't shine anymore until the light meter regenerates. But wishes can recover that light meter, and it can also heal a little bit of HP and MP.
Yeah, although in expert mode, you only get the light meter recovery too. That's part, I guess, something that changes the routing for an expert mode speedrun a fair bit.
So you just noticed that she closed out of the game. It's okay, 100% intentional. For that cutscene and then the cutscene immediately after it. Oh, she's having this problem. That's really frustrating. A little bit of technical difficulties. So she 100% intended to close out of the game here. And by closing out of the game at a certain point during that cutscene, she's able to skip the cutscene. And she'll just load up her save again. And then she'll get to the next cutscene and she can do it there too. For whatever reason,
this game does have it, because this game does have an autosave feature that I believe is mandatory. I don't think it's even possible to turn it off. Right. And there's several bits of speed tech that involve abusing that fact, abusing the fact of knowing when the game is autosaving your progress in order to do certain kinds of skips. So she's having a little bit of trouble right now, and sometimes you can run into some technical difficulties where Steam, you close out of Child of Light and then you open it back up, and Steam thinks the game is still running, so it doesn't want you, it's like you're already playing this game, you can't start it. So you kind of notice that she had to fuddle a little bit with it, but that's not something we'll have to see anymore, because that's well, we'll see it one more time, because we'll have to do another set of closing out of the game. She also just got her first confession too, which are the main kind of collectible item in the game that's tracked in your inventory. They're just letters that give you expanded bits of story lore about the game's world.
Yeah, there's 16 confessions, so you just kind of have to know where to find them. And so this being 100% or all quests and confessions, we have to pick up all of them. And immediately after this, we pick up our first character, our first party member. Her name is Rubella. She's kind of a jester of sorts, and interestingly enough, kind of comically, everything in this game rhymes. All the characters when they talk, the narrator, but Rubella, just her, I guess part of her character is she tries to rhyme, but just constantly fails at it. So there's a few points where Igniculus kind of scolds Rubella because Rubella is choosing the wrong words and not rhyming. So it's a little bit of comic relief, I guess.
And then also Aurora can fly now after defeating the statues too, and that's basically the rest of the game for the most part, and that now the kind of platforming and movement elements of the game are changed in a pretty major way. So you notice how she's moving a lot faster, and she's also using Igniculus to kind of scoop up items along the way without having to stop.
Yeah, you could. There's a air dash that you can do. As you see here, there's kind of a skill tree system. When you level up, you get skill points, and you can put them into points into a skill tree. For the most part, we're going to be taking the magical route for Aurora. Her main damage is going to be coming from her main spell, Starlight. We'll get into other characters as we gain them in terms of what they're going to be doing. For this fight, there's going to be these two wolves at the start, at the front, and then that kind of scary ogre in the back. Have to kill the dogs first, and then we can focus on dealing with the ogre.
Yeah, that is required too. Because most of the remaining bosses in the game have 2 helper monsters with them that are usually kind of upgraded versions of normal monsters in the area preceding them. But in order to win the boss battle, you do have to kill all 3 of them. You can't just kill the main boss enemy.
So this fight is actually a little bit trickier in 100% because normally we would use Stardusts, which are kind of items that you collect that give you stat boosts, to push us to the point where we can kill these wolves really quickly. But we want to save those up, and I'll get into why later on. So it's a little unfortunate that Aurora died, but at this point, ooh, unlucky dodge. It's going to be safe and defend here.
Yeah, Aurora is pretty squishy at this point because of being a bit under-leveled, so she's choosing to just leave her dead and do the fight with Rubella instead of trying to get Aurora back up.
Opting for a bit of safety, just using a potion. So you notice that the ogres are in a particularly great, having a hard time landing interrupts on the ogre and getting a few interrupts on Rubella herself. Well, this fight is actually a little tricky, and if it gets off the rails, like it's a little hard to maintain control. And actually, a lot of fights in this game, like if you stay on track, you can remain in control. But then once you lose control, it goes pretty south pretty quick.
Yeah, and then the boss just used a move looks like it's called Charge in Japanese. It's called Gather Strength in the English version, which is an attack that quite a few bosses have too, where it's kind of a 2-turn move where they do Gather Strength and they do basically their strongest attack on the turn after that.
We did pull through though.
Characters. This is a game kind of like Final Fantasy Mystic Quest 2, where it doesn't matter if characters are alive or dead at the end of battle for XP awards.
Yeah, Aurora stands up. Something interesting to note: characters don't get a full heal after battles, but for the speedrun, they might as well, just because in pretty much every single fight, we're going to be leveling up on all characters. So they'll
leveling up gives a full heal.
Right. So normally we're coming into the next village here, and we're going to be picking up our next character. And what the game expects us to do before we can really get the next character, his name is Finn, and he's a spellcaster. Before we can get him into our party, we have to help him out. But we want to move on with our story first. So we're gonna convince him to join our party without helping him out, and we'll come back later on because this is 100%. So we're going to be setting up a glitch here where we're going to try to go into the well and pause at the same time, and we actually just got the ability to teleport. So once you go into the well, it activates a cutscene, but because you are paused, and then when you go to teleport, it's trying to do the cutscene and the pause at the same, and the teleport at the same time, and it gets a little confused. The cutscene finishes, but the teleport also finishes. And when the teleport finishes, it kind of puts the game autosaves because it wants to remember where you are. And at that point, at a very particular point, we close out of the game. We Alt F4, and then when we load the game back up, as long as we've timed it perfectly, we'll be we'll have Finn in our party because he joins us at the end of the cutscene, but we've teleported back to the altar, and normally Finn should be in our party. She's probably gonna. She might check. She might not check. She's not checking. We're pretty confident that that Finn is in our party, even though it looked like he was crying back there. He's actually in our party. If she paused, she could confirm. And Finn isn't supposed to actually join your party until you complete that little side quest for him, where you go into the well.
He does join you for the side quest too, but until you complete it, you can't do anything else with him. Stay in his village. So the result of that glitch is kind of getting the rewards from Finn's side quest without actually doing it. And if this were an any % run, that would be the end of it. But since this is 100%, she does actually have to eventually do Finn's quest. But doing it right now would be very, very hard, because there's a pretty nasty boss at the end of that well, and she's going to be holding off on doing it until she's gotten stronger.
Yeah, it's kind of a tutorial boss, because Finn is a spellcaster, and you kind of choose, like, he has different elemental spells, and there are elemental weaknesses in this game, and it's a 3-headed hydra, and each of them represent a different element. So it's supposed to try to teach you about that sort of system. But when you go into that level, when you go into that boss a little under leveled, it's actually pretty tricky. It's kind of nasty. So yeah, we're just going to be ignoring it for now, doing it later. Getting our next character already. So this next character, her name is Nora, and she's actually Aurora's half-sister. So a little bit of a plot update. Nora says that she wound up in this land too. She got pushed through a mirror, and Aurora's been trying to get home here. So Nora's like, hey, well, let's try to find a way to get home together.
And I believe that is there a confession in this side area down here?
Yeah, there's a confession. There's actually a Stardust too, just happenstance. But we do have to go out of our way in a few places just to pick up a confession or do something for a quest.
Doing the extra 100% stuff isn't really that costly too. Like, I want to say it's about like 25 minutes or so, I think.
Yeah, something
on top
like
of
that.
an any % run to do all quests and confessions.
Yeah, so my any % time is a 114, and my very not optimal 100% run is about a 142, so a little under half an hour, 25-30 minutes. Slow. How long does this game take casually? Probably in the 10 to 15 hour range.
Yeah, I mean, even though this game kind of feels to me a lot like an indie game, it's actually by Ubisoft.
Yeah, it's really surprising. They decided to just make a small little RPG, sell it for not that much. It's something I'd really like to see off of more larger developers. Just do little side projects like this, and we can kind of get nice little charms like this game.
And we just met our yet another new party member. You'd almost think this was Chrono Cross or something, with how many people are joining us in rapid succession, who's a mouse archer named Robert.
Yeah, because we're kind of ignoring a lot of content at the moment. Like, that area that we kind of went through pretty quickly is actually a pretty large area. There's a lot of areas to explore, stuff to fight. There's quests you would be able to do if you did the well properly. But we're just going to go straight to the next area. So the next dungeon here is actually going to be taking place inside this living mountain named Magna. And Magna's not feeling too hot. Something about her heart just isn't quite right. So we're gonna help out Magna, because Magna is going to be able to take us up into the clouds to get us to where we want to go.
So we're basically going to be playing Operation with a living mountain.
So what kind of heart problems would a living mountain have?
Spiders, of course.
Spiders. Oh, of course. I hate when spiders get into my body and mess up my heart.
And then for the I guess it kind of feels kind of weird to call it platforming, given that it's mostly flying. But the for that portion of this dungeon, Aurora does take damage if you touch the lava or the fireballs, but that damage only affects Aurora, and I don't believe she's going to actually be using Aurora for any of the battles here, so that's relevant.
Not until the boss. So there's actually going to be 3 required fights that we have to do. There's going to be 3 sets of 3 spiders each before we can fight the boss. And we're going to be using our 2 new characters that joined us, because characters join you at a set level. So the 2 new characters that join us, Robert and Nora, they're much stronger than all of our other characters.
Yeah, they're basically, their levels are set to kind of what your average is expected to be at in a casual playthrough.
Not to mention, both of them are pretty good. So Robert being the bow rat, his basic attack is actually an AoE, as we can see there. And Nora gets a lot of supportive like buffs and debuffs. So the basic idea with these 3 fights, we're going to do a lull all, which is a lull is a slow on all of the spiders, and then we're going to be quickening Robert. That's a haste type effect, and just letting Robert go to town, and then trying to manage our ATB so that the spiders aren't interrupting Robert, and so that the section can go nicely. But one of those spiders is
as we're kind of seeing here, the main thing that can go wrong, even after we've kind of broken the turn economy with quicken and lull, is missing with attacks, because caeshura is setting up a kind of a pattern where she keeps just interrupting the spiders over and over again, so they don't actually attack her. But if she misses, the interrupt doesn't happen, and that both means that the spider gets to attack, and then also it gets desynced from the other 2 as far as where it is on the ATB bar.
Yeah, the spiders actually have a pretty reasonable chance to dodge. So, like when you're really grinding runs, when caeshura and I were really grinding runs down for any percent, this was probably the most frustrating part, just because there's just little tiny things that can happen in each of the fights where you just lose seconds here and there, but then those seconds add up to be like a minute. It's pretty frustrating, but
yeah, all 3 of these spider mini-boss fights are exactly the same, too, so that they get progressively easier as you level up from each one.
And the same thing that I said for the giant fight, normally these fights would be a little bit quicker, at least the first one, because we would spend some Stardust, those stat-boosting items, on Robert, but we still want to save them, and I'll get into why later. So Robert's a little bit weaker right now than he would be in a normal any percent run, and it just by a few damage. But that few damage for the first fight does make it so that the spiders die 1 turn faster. caeshura taking a moment to decide which one she wants to attack. Oh, also, by the way, Nora's basic attack, I want to hit something with a sword, has a chance to paralyze. Paralyze being a stop-like effect. It's pretty nice, but in some cases it can actually be detrimental, because a lot of status effects tend to overwrite each other. So paralyze will actually overwrite slow. So if you have something slowed and then you paralyze it, when it gets out of paralyze, it's not going to be slowed anymore.
Are these the battles too, where there's a little bit of variance in what you do in the first turn, depending on what the starting ATB is?
Right, that's something I forgot to mention. So something that caeshura has been doing is trying to get surprise attacks or preempt attack fights. So when you sneak up behind an enemy that isn't considered a boss, you'll get the advantage, and that puts your characters closer to the start of the start of the turn, and the enemies are kind of all in the back. But in terms of which of your characters actually takes their turn first is random. So there's two strategies we developed for these spider fights in terms of what we do. And ideally, we like to see Nora start first. And I think for both of these fight, Nora started first. In that case, we like to open up with slow on all of the spiders, and followed up by quicken on Robert, and then Robert just kind of goes to town with his rain arrows. However, if Robert starts first, it tends to be more consistent if one other spell that Nora has is called Unstoppable, which basically negates a character from getting interrupted. So we'll open up with that on Robert instead.
And this little Scrooge McDuck detour right here is a side quest, because I think it pretty much boils down that every other character, for the most part, has some kind of side quest associated with them. And Finn's is fairly lengthy. It involves a whole dungeon and a boss, but Robert's side quest is just solving a pretty easy light puzzle with Igniculus.
That puzzle is pretty difficult. I don't know what you're talking about. All that money hidden behind a combination that like a 10-year-old child can solve. But yeah, so if we actually didn't want Robert in our party, we could ignore that side quest and just leave Robert. But for the most part, at least in this 100% run, if we want to get a character to join our party, we have to help them out by doing a quest or being nice to them or doing something for them. In any percent, that isn't quite the case, and we can sometimes convince people to join our party, as kind of we saw with Finn.
This is the third and final spider mini boss trio.
Yep, and then we're going to get to the real spider boss next. And before we get into that, there's going to be a game mechanic we haven't touched on. So these items called oculi that caeshura has been accumulating throughout Magna here, and oculi are kind of this game's equipment. You can put these oculi, they're gems, into different equipment slots, so weapon, armor, or accessory. And they have different colors and do different things based on what slots you put them in. And there's a little bit of crafting you can do with them as well. So they have different levels. So if you put multiple colors together, they kind of get a little bit stronger, or you can combine different colors together to have them change. They'll turn into a different color and do different effects. So what we're going to see here is she's going to do a little bit of crafting, and we're going to make an onyx, which is going to be black, and it's going to boost magic power, as well as tourmaline, which is kind of a teal, blue, greenish thing, and that's also going to be boosting our magic power.
And then oculi are the only real equipment in this game too. There's no like or armor upgrades. There's just the skill tree system that you spend points you get for leveling up on, and then you can equip up to 3 oculi for varying effects depending on the color and then which slot you equip it in.
Right. So we're going to be using Finn in this section, just because to kill the spider boss, we actually are going to need to rely on Finn, and we're going to boost his magic to get through that. But before we can kill the big spider, we have to kill the small spiders. And this fight is actually really important because it's the first time we're going to see a mechanic that a lot of the rest of the bosses in this run are going to have, where if you interrupt the boss or particular enemies, they're going to counterattack with something. So the boss here actually has a counterattack if you interrupt it, it's going to cast Quicken on everybody. And that's really bad because Quicken and Lull are both really strong abilities, and we want to make sure everything stayed slow so we can kill them nice and fast, and they don't spend a bunch of turns beating us up and then interrupting us.
Yeah, interrupt counters kind of change the battle dynamics pretty significantly, since that definitely de-incentivizes trying to stun lock bosses with a regular interrupt.
So pretty clean first section. Opting to do a little play that first part a little on the more dangerous side. There's a safer strat that you can do, but caeshura, being an experienced runner, isn't going to do that. So we're going to boost up Finn now, and Finn's just going to lob a bunch of lightning bolts at the boss here. There's items that we picked up earlier. There's damage elixirs that we used on Finn, and that's going to boost Finn's damage just from all sources by 30% for 5 turns. And also, it's important that we keep Finn's MP high, because Finn does a lot of damage, but his kind of downside is that his spells just cost a bunch of MP. Getting a little unlucky with a paralyze from the spider. It actually lasts a really long time, but luckily it didn't hit Finn. So you're going to see Rubella just kind of doing nothing for a few turns. Nice crit.
Oh, nice crit. Crits with magic are actually fairly rare, as I understand it.
Yeah, every character just has their own crit stat, and Aurora and Finn, the two main spellcasters, just have pretty low. Like I think at this point for Finn, it's like a 3 or 4% chance. So something we're going to see here is caeshura is going to be mashing to pause here, and there's a split second. I don't know how many frames she has, but there's the game is trying to transition from one cutscene to the next, and in between there, the game allows you to pause, and she's going to teleport away, and she's going to teleport to a completely different zone, so that the game has to load. And what that does is the game is going to think that cutscene played. So normally we would have to see a cutscene where we go back to the village mayor, we say, hey, we got your money. Robert's really excited because, Robert wanted to get the kind of save the town to getting the money to impress a girl, but it turns out that Robert gets rejected anyway. Which is sad, because Robert, we have to cheer him up a little bit, and then Robert joins our party. We skip that whole cutscene. It saves about a whole minute.
Just casually playing the flute makes everything better in this game.
Yeah, you see a story plot device. Aurora has this flute that she was given by the old lady at the start of the game, and she just plays it, and people do stuff for her. Just
got another confession. And also, if it wasn't obvious, that she is now doing Finn's quest that she skipped earlier. And at any percent run, once you skip that post spider boss cutscene, you would just kind of go back to that area and then get on with the story. But she's kind of combining that skip with actually going into the well to fight the Trinex. Hydra here. Which is going to be a bit of a pushover actually at this point. She's got all of the level ups from Magna, plus having. I guess she's not actually using Robert here, but
she probably will. Oh no! So actually, it might be a good idea. So the most frustrating part about this fight is just that there's a lot of enemies out, and they can just interrupt you constantly. Especially Robert's kind of he's a slow spellcaster. But Finn's going to be doing a good chunk of the damage. So I think just having Rubella out, Rubella's kind of a supportive character. Her damage isn't the best, but she takes her turns really quick. So her tumble attacks can hit everybody, and they happen so quickly. It can be a good way to manage the battle, because you can keep things interrupted while Robert takes his turns a little bit more slowly, but does a little bit more damage.
I think this is kind of not really how you're intended to fight this boss, too. I think you're not really going to focus on one head at a time.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't have any AoE abilities unless you did some grinding, serious grinding before this boss fight. I don't think you would have Tumble All, and you definitely wouldn't have the Lightning Strike All ability. So that fight went pretty okay. A little rough start, but a good finisher. So, lore update. So Finn's town had been turned into crows by Umbra, the kind of dark queen that's ruling the land. I guess we kind of forgot to give a little bit of plot at the start of the game. The old lady at the start of the game told Aurora that there used to be a Queen of Light who is kind and good and everybody liked her, but then she left and was replaced by like this evil queen, and everybody things got bad after that. This evil queen turned Finn's town into crows, so Finn, his whole side quest is, well, he has to save his town. He wants to turn them not into crows. So by purifying this well here, that does that. Also, we see by peering into the well, Aurora sees an update on her father, and her father isn't doing too hot. So it just strengthens her resolve that she wants to get back home as quickly as possible. So here we see all of them turn back into not crows. I believe that these people are called the Capelli, if I remember correctly.
That's what Finn's race is called. They're basically dwarves.
Yeah, they're like quick living dwarves. So they all look like they're really, really old, but if I remember correctly, Finn's only like 10 or 11 years old. They just age really quickly, I think, is the whole point behind that. And of course, here we have our flute playing, making everything better. So now that the Capelli village has been healed, some of these guys are going to have quests for us, which, being 100% run, we're going to have to do. So there's 2 quests that we can pick up here, one from that grumpy old guy and one from this lady. This lady lost her pig, her flying pig. So we have to go save him, I believe. If I remember correctly, his name is Achilles.
That sounds right.
And then the old guy he has a house off somewhere, but it's been kind of infested with spiders and other enemies, so we have to go beat him up. We pick up another quest over here, and we're gonna first find Achilles. So we just teleport back over here and just backtrack a little bit. And casually speaking, the reason why you would want to do these quests is, of course, there's a reward at the end of it. The rewards for the quests tends to be pretty good. You get a bunch of Stardusts. Again, there's stat boosting items. We get quite a bit of them.
I think you get oculi from some of them too.
Right. If I remember correctly, the finding the pig, finding Achilles gives 4 HP Stardusts, and then the quest from the old guy gives 4 Tourmalines, which are particularly good. We tend to use them in their inoculi. In armor, in the armor slot, they boost your magic defense, and in the accessory slot, they boost your magic. So that tends to be a pretty important oculi throughout the run. So we just get a bunch of them, and it makes things a little bit easier. She forgot that. So the other quest she picked up is called Free Trade, and there's a mouse that we want to take lessons from because he's teaching like economy or something like that. But he says a little girl can't possibly understand that, so he sent us on a quest to try to turn an apple into gold. So it's basically a series of quests where we exchange items. So we go to the teacher there, he wants an apple, he gives us a shovel. We're going to go back to the monastery, and there's going to be a gravedigger who doesn't have a shovel. He might need one. He gives us a lantern, and then we turn the lantern we give it to a miner who needs some light, and he gives us some gold. So that's what we're going to be doing right now.
It's the reason why this is being done now, just because you can basically.
We can, and because these quests give us stardusts.
Okay.
We're gonna want to make sure to get as many stardusts as we can before the next boss fight, which in any percent run is actually a little tricky. So we kind of want to. We're going to use the Stardust in a particular way to power up. I'll explain why we've been saving up our Stardusts as we get a little bit closer. But we're kind of accumulating a bunch, and then we're going to use them.
Yeah, and also accepting slightly slower and more dangerous early game boss fights in return for not exact. I wouldn't really say trivializing, but making some of the just harder in general boss fights later in the game easier.
Right. I mean, well, you could trivialize it if you really wanted to, but that would take a little bit more time. But yeah, these fights right here are pretty easy. Just as we can see, just killing them with AoE attacks.
So these battles are all required in order to get the lantern.
So she did it in a particular order where she's doing this is the old man's quest, Pastoral Panic, if I remember correctly, where we clean out this house that he has over here, and then she's going to go over to finish off the exchange quest. So here's where we get 4 tourmalines, I believe, tumbled tourmalines, which there are different. I kind of explained that there are different levels of oculi, as you see there. She just combined 3 oculi of the same oculi to make a stronger oculi. So turning tumbled tourmalines into what's the next level? I forget.
Is it Spinet?
That sounds right. And then I believe the final one is Brilliant.
None of these oculi are part of the 100% requirements, though, just because there's not really a permanent collectible. There's something that you can accumulate and then consume.
Yeah, the only thing that you might consider is so oculi in this game are actually somewhat random. You can kill quote unquote random encounters, non-boss encounters, and they'll give random oculi occasionally as their reward. So casually, you're not getting the same set of oculi over and over again, but like you can kind of combine them to create stronger and stronger one. There is kind of the ultimate oculi. It's called the Princess Stone that just does a whole bunch of stuff, but it would be pretty difficult to get in a single playthrough. It essentially would just require a lot of grinding. So not really something you could consider for like 100% run, because you can end up with like as many of them as you want. So this is the last of the side quests that we're going to complete right now. Bulmus Inferno. So we go over to this guy here, and he says that his basement's a little dirty. He needs some help cleaning it out. So us being the good people that we are, we're gonna give him a hand. But what he didn't tell us is that it's infested with some nasty monsters. And so the quest basically just being go in here and clean out all the monsters.
Are these the same as the fiery monsters in Griffin's area, or are these unique?
Yeah, some of them. So the flame ghost star, I don't think you see the spider, the flame spiders in Griffin's area. But all these, pretty much everything in here is weak to water. The ghosts tend to have high physical resistance, so we mostly have to rely on Finn's water spell, Monsoon, to kill them, which doesn't do a whole bunch of damage because we kind of mentioned the skill trees earlier. Finn's skill trees are basically split up into different elements, and for very particular reasons, we focus on the lightning path because that tends to be that for the purposes of a speedrun, that is going to do the most damage. That just means for this part, we're doing a little bit less damage than we would really like on these fire enemies.
Does the extra experience she gets from these side quest battles really matter much in the grand scheme of things?
A little bit. For the most part, not too much because we'll be boosting our stats another way. But it does help out a little bit. I think it makes Aurora get a skill that you would normally have to wait until after Griffin to get, and now you get it before Griffin, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter too much. So there'll be, I think, 2 more fights, this one and the following one. And then we can head over to the next boss fight after doing a little bit of stat boosting.
Yeah, I believe the next boss fight is why caeshura is wearing the shirt that she's wearing too.
Yeah, so the next boss fight, interestingly enough, like enemies in this game don't actually have names. So we tend to just make up names for them. But the next boss fight is pretty clearly a griffin. And griffin, of course, are birds. And if anybody's played any video games before, you really should know that birds are jerks. And caeshura is wearing the jerk bird shirt / demon chocobo shirt, if you're familiar with the RPG Limit Break channel. So, and of course, being a bird, anything that has wings, Griffin is actually quite a jerk. It's probably, for any percent, is probably the hardest boss fight. Definitely the hardest boss fight to learn. It's actually a really cool strategy that we developed for fighting it, because it takes a normally very RNG fight and makes it super, super consistent as long as you execute properly. And it basically comes down,
is kind of easier said than done too.
Yeah, it comes down to you have to control the ATB of all the enemies in the fight, all 3 enemies in the fight at once. If you interrupt Griffin, that's a huge mistake. It's Griffin's counterattack for interrupting it is a slow all on your party. Aurora, the 2 enemies that Griffin has accompanying it are ghosts, which take less damage from physical, and Aurora isn't particularly strong at this point. She gets stronger much later on, but so we have to rely on Aurora, who doesn't do that much damage, is pretty fragile. Have to rely on Aurora to kill them. But there's a setup we have where you can kind of manage the ATB of everything, and if you execute it well, it goes super smoothly, and it's like really, really satisfying to get. But if you make a single mistake, the fight, you lose like at least a minute, pretty guaranteed. But this is 100%, not any percent. So we're gonna take our revenge on Griffin. So I might as well start explaining what we'll be doing with the Stardust. So I've been making a point of, we've been collecting Stardust throughout this run so far, but we haven't used them yet. And we're going to start using them now. There's a glitch that caeshura is going to attempt to perform, where Stardust are just an item, so to use them, you go into your inventory, you use them, you select a character you want to get the stat boosts on. So, for example, the Magic Stardust is going to increase your magic by 3 points. And then, of course, when you use an item, it goes away. It's a consumable. What we're going to do is we're going to get up right before Griffin, so right before the boss encounter triggers. We're going to pause. We're going to use all but one of our stack of Stardust. It's very important you keep one stack remaining, or one item remaining in that stack. And then we're going to go into the boss fight after unpausing. And when we get into the boss fight, we're immediately going to run away. You can run away from every single fight in this game. And what you'll see here is when you run away, you get put outside of the fight, and you're going to do the same thing. And when you pause again, the stack of Stardust that you had goes back to what it was before you used any of them, but your stats remained. So essentially, it's a way to dupe items, kind of.
Yeah,
so
I believe it's also abusing the autosave.
Right.
Part of that too,
Most
kind of a
of the
glitch in
glitches
how
in this game-
autosaving works.
Yeah, most of the glitches in this game are abusing the kind of not best autosave that the game has. It saves certain things, but kind of forgets others. So as you can see, she just used a bunch of Stardust. Where did all these HP Stardust come from? And so we'll use Magic Stardust on Aurora, Strength Stardusts on Robert. So we're boosting both Aurora and Robert right now. I'm curious how many times she's going to do it. I believe optimally you can do 2 sets of duping here. Yeah, okay, she's going to dupe it twice, going to run away, and I think she's going to actually go into the fight for real now. If she wanted to, she could continue this forever.
Yeah, and then also this strat is only used in 100% because you only really get enough Stardusts from doing the side quests to make it worth your while to spend time doing this glitch when you have that many of them.
Right. So the start of this fight is pretty much going to be identical to the any percent. We're going to tumble all, starting with Rubella, and that's going to interrupt everything. Which, as we can see, we get counterattacked, we get slowed, but we're going to follow that up with slowing their party. And then as soon as Nora gets another turn, we're going to remove the slow. We're going to get Aurora into our party and then quicken our party. And then this next turn from Griffin, so she's going to be spending this whole turn that Griffin is trying to take, managing exactly where Griffin is on the ATB bar. What she wants is she wants Aurora to get another Starlight in here before Griffin gets to the weight bar, before Griffin can take another turn. But you want Griffin kind of close to the weight bar, so she can't constantly be slowing. She has to let up a little bit. And then she's going to bring in Finn here and throw a round of his spells. I want to say that this... Okay, I think she's going to do this properly. So what she's going to try to do here, Aurora started to take her turn. She's going to stop slowing here. Oh, that's not what we don't want. So she was playing a little greedy, and as you can see here, we just interrupted Griffin. I told you before, we don't want that. But it's not the worst thing ever, because this is 100%. These Banshees die really quickly. In an any percent run, if that happened, that would cost a whole bunch of time. But that maybe cost a single character's turn. Really not that bad for messing that up in a 100% run. It's a lot.
Once the Banshees are dead, she's swapping characters and using primarily physical attacks too, just because the Banshees only really take damage from magic, but Griffin only really takes damage from physical attack, and that's a big part of where the difficulty of this fight comes from too, is that
right.
You can't really do anything that's kind of equally hurting all 3 enemies.
So I just want to point out, in an any percent run, Robert here would be doing about 100 damage with these hinders. And his hinders now, because we gave him so much strength, do 250. Yeah, that increased our damage by quite a significant margin. And what would be a very frustrating fight in any percent is very satisfying to just kind of destroy Griffin in the way that we do in 100%.
That's one of I kind of view that as one of the reasons to do 100% runs like this too, is to
that's when we found out this this glitch, like I kind of immediately wanted to put it to use for making a 100% run, because Griffin is very frustrating, and many runs have died of mine at Griffin. Just because you make a simple mistake and the fight goes south and you just lose too much time. Sometimes it's not even recoverable and you have to just retry the fight from the start. Not to mention sometimes the fight just goes, the fight starts off and there's nothing you can do. Because if an enemy dodges at the start of the fight, that kind of ruins the whole setup we have. So, lore update. Nora was leading us to this magic mirror, which she told us is our ticket back home. So we're following Nora here. She's our technically half sister, but still our sister. We trust her. In no way, shape, or form would she ever betray us. Right?
Nah.
Oh, also we meet our stepmother and other stepsister. Our stepmother isn't too kind to us right now, and in fact, she kind of wants to kill us. Not the kindest of things, but we're protected by a spell that the characters indicate is coming from our crown. And we'll see actually where the spell comes from in a second here, because we have a little bit of a flashback sequence. This is Aurora's mother. We're going to see kind of, well, normally we would read what happens, but that might be a little difficult for you guys to read it. Basically, Aurora's mother is going to, we're having a little bit of chat. Aurora's just being a child, doing child things. Her mother is being a mother. Something bad is going to happen, unfortunately. Aurora has a bit of a hard life.
As evidenced by the fact that she's frolicking back and forth through this meadow.
So something dire has happened to Aurora's mother, and she indicates that some sort of spell has been cast on her. And Aurora's mother is actually going to cast a spell onto Aurora that basically says, if the same spell that has fallen me is cast onto my daughter, instead of killing her, bring her to the altar, which the altar at the beginning of the game. So that's why instead of dying at the start of the game, Aurora is, wakes up on that altar that we see at the very start. So it's she revived basically due to her mother casting a spell on her.
This plot element kind of feels to me like they borrowed a bit from the Harry Potter franchise.
Something mothers love. But okay, we're done with our flashback. We're still stuck in a prison. They may not, your stepmother might not be able to kill you, but she can still throw you in a prison and lock you up. So what do we do when we're locked in a prison? Well, I guess we play our flute. And would you have it, we're able to convince the prison guard that was the one that locked us up. He's going to actually help us out now, because he recognizes this song, and the song from basically when the good queen was still around. So he's kind of having a bit of a change of heart, is basically what happened. And you notice caeshura doesn't have Iniculus right now. So you lost your party members when you decided to try to go back home, and then got betrayed by your sister. So right now, our
a fun little thing in the any percent run though is that you don't actually lose Finn during this part because the game doesn't actually think that he's with you in the first place.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. When you cheat a character into your party, that we do in any percent, the game obviously knows the characters in your party, but like the flag or something hasn't been set, so they participate in some events, but then don't participate in others, and the game doesn't think that the characters in your party. So I'm sure the game has some sort of thing that looks at your party and says, okay, remove Robert from your party, remove Rubella from your party, but it doesn't know that Finn's in your party, so it doesn't tell Finn to leave the party, so he still's there. Another little bit of a light puzzle after rescuing our friends. I think she managed. How did she manage to pick up that Stardust without having to go? You know, I'm curious to know if maybe she's playing on a higher resolution than I do, so maybe that's why she's able to snag some of these Stardusts that I can't. I'm curious if that's the case, because she's grabbed a few Stardusts that I would have to go that would be off screen for me. So I'm curious if she's doing something special, or if it's something to do with the resolution she uses that is different for me. In any case, that's just me rambling. We have a bit of a maze here that we don't see in any percent. It's a kind of a cool maze. There's a series of doors, and you have to figure out which one to go through. And if you go in the wrong one, you start at the beginning. If you pay attention, there's the statues that have a shield on them, and the shield has a symbol, and all the doors have some sort of symbol associated with them. And I like that the game doesn't really tell you how to solve the puzzle. It just throws the puzzle at you, and you kind of have to figure out that, oh, hey, symbols, statues, figure it out yourself.
And this is Oangus's side quest, Oangus being the prison guard that just joined you.
So for 100%, of course, to get a character to join your party, we have to help them out. Kind of the plot behind it. Oangus kind of betrayed his clan by helping out the Dark Queen. So he goes to rescue them, but they kind of reject him because he essentially betrayed them at the start. So they kick him out. We play
Cath something, I think is what Oangus's tribe is called.
I believe so. We play him a song, make him feel better, and then he's going to join our party. In any percent, it's kind of the story of we do a bunch of stuff to get characters to join our party without helping them out. In any percent, Aurora's a bit of a jerk. We just convince them to join our party, and we don't do any favors for them. So we're able to skip
It's pretty hilarious how we do it exactly with Oangus too, because it involves basically just triggering the boss fight, coming up here multiple times and running away.
There's actually a few ways to do that. That's my favorite way, because essentially you trigger the boss fight, run away, and then do it again and run away, and then Oangus joins your party. Like we leave Oangus, forget that we don't have him, and get scared and run away, and then we do it again, and then for whatever reason he's in your party. Again, has to do with the whole autosave thing. You see caeshura do another round of boosting stats with Stardust. We're going to do another, I'm not too sure how many times she's going to do it, but we're going to do another few rounds of using all but one stack, boosting our magic and strength, get into a fight, flee, and do it again until, however many times she would like to do it. You could do this forever. At least until you have max stats. So in terms of what kind of character Owangus is, he's kind of your physical damage dealing tank. So he's got a bunch of HP. He's got a bunch of physical defense, and he does just a bunch of just damage. He doesn't have too much utility beyond that. He has a taunting ability, which, as it sounds, gets all enemies to focus him. So
yeah, all enemy single target attacks will always hit this.
Right. And that's very good, because that means we don't really have to pay attention to, say, in this fight, Aurora getting interrupted in most cases. So we have these kind of ghost enemies that are pretty similar to the Banshees that we saw in the last fight. So our setup is basically going to be we now have Hinder All on Robert, which is a damage dealing slow type of effect. If you were paying attention to the story, we no longer have Nora in our party to handle the slowing for us. And then we're just going to bring out Aurora. Something that I find kind of amusing, you saw Owangus throw the potion on Robert, and then with Robert's turn, we switched to Aurora. But the potion still goes to Aurora, and that's like kind of a feature of the game I really like, that you can throw potions onto characters, switch them out, and have it go to the correct character that you want it to go to.
Using taunt strats does require being able to count to 3, though.
Right.
The taunt lasts exactly 3 turns, and you do not want it to wear off at a bad point.
It seems like there's some sort of rubber banding effect with like aggression, because almost all the time when taunt wears off, the attention of the enemies is going to be focused on not Owangus. So if taunt is ever down for a single moment and an enemy takes a turn, they're probably, with a very high chance, just going to hit Aurora, and it's probably going to counterattack her. And something else to note, since comparing it to any percent, we have boosted Aurora's magic. If I remember correctly, we do about 170 damage normally in any percent. We're doing a bit over 100 damage more in 100% because of the duping of Stardust that we do, and that actually saves, I think, 2 or 3 turns.
And then also Cordelia, this boss, has, I believe, a heal all interrupt counter too.
Yeah, of the counterattacks for interrupts, hers is not too much, not too bad. It doesn't affect you too much, but it can make the fight take a little bit longer because everybody gets healed. But in some cases, you can say, well, it's a better decision to do that and just take the time loss. Then Cordelia can actually do some pretty scary attacks. And likewise with Griffin, ghosts that take very little physical damage, then Cordelia and Griffin don't really take much magical damage, but take a whole bunch of physical damage. So you have to, the game very much incentivizes you to constantly switch out party members.
And now we've gotten after like an hour after finding the being tasked to get the sun, the moon, and the stars back from Evil Queen Umbra, we get the second part of that, which is the moon.
Also, we get a little bit older. For whatever reason, getting Power of the Moon turns Aurora from a young child to now she's kind of a young adult, probably in like some sort of her teenagers. Gets a dress to accompany it.
Personally, I'm kind of more of a fan of just the art style of Child Aurora, just because I think that kind of just suits the fairy tale atmosphere of the game better. But
narratively speaking, this game essentially tells a coming-of-age story, so the age progression is kind of an important point of the story. And comparing her run so far to just to kind of give a sense of how she's doing, I would say she's doing quite well. I imagine she's going to come. There's a 150-minute estimate. Unless something horrible happens, she should very easily make that. So this village is the Peaskin village, kind of a village of these fish-type, goblin-type enemies. And unfortunately, most of them aren't around anymore because there was a kind of a mean ogre that did some not so kind things to them. But we told again the young lady that we would help find her parents. And before we do so, of course, we have a little light puzzle to solve. This one's pretty neat because it's kind of numbers based. So if there's Roman numerals on each of these little statues, and you have to push the statues around to be able to get to a point where you can shine a shadow onto the same symbols on a wall. And there's kind of a little trick that you can do here. Well, she was able to do it very quickly, where you're supposed to have to push that statue all the way down to the bottom, but you can kind of have a little bit of a setup where you can do it without having to push it all the way down, and that saves you from having to deal with that guy that's kind of blocking that area. So this leads us to our next boss. It's a pretty similar fight to the giant fight, the second boss in the game, where you had 2 wolves and a giant. Again, enemies in this game don't really have names, so we tend to refer to the first boss as giant and this one as ogre. We have 2 dogs and an ogre/giant enemy. One main thing that we need to do here is we need to make sure to not interrupt the ogre here. And he has a very, very nasty counterattack for interrupting him, and hits everybody and it paralyzes, and it can sometimes soft lock your game. But these dogs take a bunch of damage from Finn, so we lob a few lightning strikes at them. 3 should do the trick. And then, for whatever reason, the ogre doesn't have almost any physical defense, and he just takes a whole bunch of damage from Owangus. So once the wolves are down, Robert and Owangus just kind of go to town on him with just dealing a whole bunch of physical damage. And the amount of damage that we're doing right now is kind of ridiculous. Doing almost 500 damage just on normal attacks with Owangus. It's about double what we would see in any percent. The soft lock, if I remember correctly, has to do with I've never personally got it myself, but I've seen other people get it. It has to do with if you counterattack in certain situations with Robert, basically what happens is the game will think it's Robert's turn, but he got interrupted, so the game's trying to tell you to take a turn with Robert, but his ATB is at the very start of the bar, and you can't take a turn with him, and it just kind of you can't do anything. You can't take any turns.
That's exclusive to this one fight.
Yeah, at least that's all I've ever seen with it. It has to do with getting paralyzed in that situation. It's the game's trying to tell Robert to take a turn, but Robert's paralyzed and it's not his turn, and the game just doesn't go anywhere. Really odd, and again, it hasn't happened to me, but I've seen it happen to other people. Basically, just don't interrupt the ogre there, and you're good. So this Aniculus-looking fellow has another side quest for us, and we're going to initiate the side quest right now, but we're not going to complete it right away. Basically, what we have to do is there's these elemental shrines where we go find basically Aniculus's friends and tell them to kind of all come back to this point. And they're all located throughout the world. So one thing we'll have to do is go back and revisit a lot of areas to get to finish that side quest. And there's going to be a few other things that we have to finish up at the same time as well. So here we come across another well. The first well that we saw, we got a little bit of a glimpse on how our father is doing. Basically, an update to that. The land that Aurora is from, the area in Austria that her father kind of reigns over, is basically getting flooded. And her father has gotten severely ill and isn't really doing too hot. He's still kind of grieving over his daughter. So it just... Again, Aurora is just really wants to go home. Also, that was a nice little secret that caeshura found. It is a quest, so we do have to do it, though we would do it in any percent anyway. It gives us a bunch of onyx, which, if you remember from earlier, are a magic boosting, primarily a magic boosting oculi that we're going to be putting on our magic users. And for this fight only, we want to have fire attack, a ruby on Awangus, which gives his attacks the fire elemental property. Just because there's one enemy in this upcoming fight, that is going to be susceptible to fire, and it's kind of an annoying enemy, and we want to get it out of the way as quickly as possible. So here we have... some people used to call this guy Leviathan. Eventually, I changed the name to Sahagin, just because it looks more like the Sahagins from Final Fantasy I.
And I always find this battle a little interesting in that it's in that the two helper enemies are different from each other.
Yep, that's one thing that you notice. Interestingly enough, the helper enemies in the Cordelia fight are technically different, even though they look the same. They have different HP amounts for whatever reason. I don't quite know why. But yeah, we have two different helper enemies, and it's the gargoyle at the bottom. That's quite annoying, but I crit with the Stardust from Aurora, and then just a follow-up attack from Awangus, just take it out immediately. Not to mention that we're doing a whole bunch more damage we would be doing in any percent. And 550 damage on Finn, and Finn's not even boosted right now. So one, the tree that Aurora goes down also gets a spell called Elevate Damage. Has the same effect as those potions we were using earlier, but they're just stronger. So now it's a 30% boost, if I remember correctly. Doing just a whole bunch of 750 damage on a single attack makes really quick work of this Sahagin, and you can see the Sahagin's almost dead here. One more attack. Ooh, finishing off with a slash. I like this. Good job. I think the slash was just to interrupt. So interestingly enough, caeshura, just use a potion. I mentioned earlier, it's really important to keep Finn's MP full, because he can get 3 spells off before he runs out of magic. Okay, there we go, finishing him off. So I think caeshura was just... Go ahead.
Yeah, one nice thing about the recovery items in this game, too, is that they're all percentage-based instead of static numbers, so kind of all of the... recovery items, for the most part, still have kind of the same relative value throughout the whole game.
They basically fall into just potions that heal half, MP potions that heal 3/4, and then full recovery that heal 100% of each. And then there are potions that heal both MP and HP. Our last little light puzzle that we have to solve. I really like this light puzzle because the hint behind it so we're entering the Palace of the Sun. So the way you solve the puzzle has to do with the phases of a solar eclipse. The game doesn't tell you that unless you went back and brought Gen into your party, and then if you have Gen in your party, she gives you a hint that's how you solve it. So you have to not only match the symbols to like the point on the wall, you have to make sure to get them in the correct order. So here are the those elemental shrines that have the Aniculus-like fireflies, and we're gonna go throughout the world, find them, tell them to go back to under the sea, where they can. Then we'll be able to complete the quest, and then also there's some characters we haven't picked up. Character we haven't talked about at all because we just kind of forget about him most of the time. Rubella has a brother, and Rubella actually asks you to help her find her brother, and he's located right before Griffin. But you just go right to Griffin, pass him up, because it ends up being faster to not pick him up there, and then we have to do a return trip to go find the Elemental Shrine and some confessions. So it ends up being faster to pick him up pretty much at the end of the game.
Does getting Tristis earlier add like more text?
In some areas, it would add more text. It would add the level up when he would level up, so you'd have a few seconds there from him just leveling up. And also, you would have to kind of go out of your way to get him then, and then you would still have to go pretty much the same path here to get to the Elemental Shrine.
What does Tristis even do in battle again?
He's kind of another support type character. He's very much almost a replacement for Nora. We get Tristis right before losing Nora, so he has Unstoppable. He has Quicken, and he has a defense buff that I believe on Ultimate Armor, if I remember correctly. It buffs both physical and magical defense. Not terribly useful because it's kind of weak. His most important thing would probably be Unstoppable, but by the point in the game we get him, we instead get potions that can do Unstoppable. So he ends up not being the most useful character. On the other hand, in a little bit, we're going to get Gen in our party, and if we got Gen earlier in the run, I think there would be some really cool things we can do, because her kind of role in a fight is kind of a physical damage dealing support character, where she does a bunch of physical damage, but her abilities also have like knockback effects. She has a paralyzed spell. She has a slow, so she kind of affects she's very control oriented, and she's actually like my favorite character from this game. But unfortunately, in the speedrun, even in 100%, we don't use her at all.
Yeah, because there's only like 4 boss fights left after the point you could get her.
The earliest you could get her would be right after the ogre fight and before the Sahagan fight. So that would be 3 boss fights remaining at the earliest point you could get her. At this point, we did Sahagan first, so there's only 2 fights remaining. And because characters join your party at a set level, she doesn't have. She only has so many skill points right now. So if you really wanted to use her, we'd have to spend some time leveling her up so she gets more skills, and we don't have time for that in a speedrun. Okay, sure. Remembering to pick up all the confessions. That's a pretty easy one to forget. I didn't actually notice that the first time through she didn't pick it up.
I bet, yeah, that's the one that's in like the jet stream at the top of the screen. I think.
Kind of
I imagine that's
there.
pretty easy to miss.
Yeah. I think in my playthrough on this, which I mentioned before, my run of 100% isn't the most optimized. I actually forgot one of the to get one of those elemental shrines. So I went here to turn in the quest and then realized I had forgotten one of them and had to go back, pick it up, and then come back here. So that was quite a bit of a time loss. So if caeshura is having a pretty okay run up to this point, she very much could overtake my time just from not making that mistake, which she didn't, as we see here, because she was able to turn in the quest. Most of our efforts in terms of optimizing this game went into any percent. The 100% was, it's kind of a fun category that we ended up running a few times just because we wanted to have fun with the duping the Stardusts.
Yeah, and also have an incentive for offering with the game for like charity marathons.
Right. So this is kind of the final area, final dungeon. In this game, pretty much just going to be dodging a bunch of spikes, just trying to move as optimally as possible. Nothing to get up here. She's gotten all the confessions that she has to go out of her way for. There's going to be one more confession that is along her path. She's done all the quests.
This dungeon does have a few kind of the rare, like, moving spike puzzles that you don't have any means of just deactivating completely using Igniculus. Also, I see caeshura is
holding up a sign.
Asking questions.
Didn't quite see what it read. It said something about Final Fantasy 12, so I'm guessing that's something to do with Hoishin.
Yeah.
Hoishin being on the couch back there. As I understand it, Hoishin didn't have his finest Final Fantasy 12 run.
Yeah, as best I could tell, Sid 2 was a big me.
That sounds like Final Fantasy 12 to me.
This part of the dungeon too is on kind of a pseudo time limit too, just because, well, you're in this theater type area that knocks filled with poison gas. You are taking damage periodically, and if you do completely run out of health, it is a game over.
Poison gas from Nox? I think you meant noxious fumes from Nox.
I did, yes.
So Nora's real name is actually Nox, and we'll make a joke there about the noxious fumes. I think caeshura made the same joke there. As I see someone in the RTA in Japan chat looks like explaining the joke to the Japanese viewers. So here we have Nox. We forgot to mention that your sisters turn into dragons. Just kind of the nature of having sisters, I guess.
Sibling rivals in this game.
I don't have any sisters, so I don't know anything about that.
I do, and I can confirm it's all true.
So we start off this fight by using the very powerful unstoppable elixirs that cast it on everybody. And these tentacles actually go really, really fast, and they only really take damage from physical attacks, so we leave it up to Robert and Awangus to beat them up. And because we use the unstoppable elixir, we can kind of ignore that whole taunt thing that Awangus has, just because taunt is mostly a thing that we use to avoid getting interrupted, but we can just purely focus on going on the offense here. And as long as like Robert doesn't take a bunch of damage from like the tentacles and maybe getting a crit or two, we don't have to worry about that. Something else that's really important about this fight is Nox has an ability that she uses. We explained Gather Strength, which is a 2-turn ability where it's kind of powering up for my final attack. Nox, when she uses Gather Strength, she takes a really long time to power up. We're talking like DBZ level times to power up. As you can just look how slowly Nox is moving on the bar at the bottom. We're going to kill Nox long before she ever gets her turn. That was a nice crit. 1600 damage crit.
As you can probably guess, Nox is weak to lightning.
So, but again,
just because we've been mostly moving Finn down the lightning part of his skill tree.
Yeah, part of the reason we do that is that the past two bosses we fought are both weak to lightning, both being water-based. Not to mention the lightning path has a passive skill in it that just boosts magical damage on Finn. It ends up being up to 30% at this point of the game. Yeah, bunch of damage coming out of Finn. As long as Aurora just feeds him NP, you just keep firing it at it. Yeah, really the only thing
she has a lot of health, but she takes so much damage, even in any percent, from just boosted lightning spells. So it ends up being not really that hard of a fight overall.
It can be a little trolly because if Nox doesn't gather strength, she's actually really nasty. She throws out really high-powered abilities at you. She can her interrupt counter is unstoppable all, which is kind of annoying because it makes it harder to control the tentacles. And really you want her to gather strength, because once she gathers strength, she's essentially going to do nothing for the rest of the fight. So it just takes her out of the fight. So in any percent, and even in 100%, you can get trolled a little bit by her just not deciding to do it. We got a nice fight by just immediately turn 1, gather strength. Just Nox doesn't do anything for the rest of the fight.
Yeah, although she does actually finish charging up for her ultimate attack. It's like a frame perfect quick to actually interrupt it.
Yeah, it's basically an so different abilities have different cast times, where they'll get up to the time where they do that red bar at the bottom, and then they have some sort of cast time associated with their ability. So most abilities kind of have, a long, short, kind of medium cast times. Serpent's Kiss, if I remember correctly what it's called, it doesn't have a cast time. It's essentially an instant cast time, but it is possible to interrupt, basically essentially being frame perfect, that you have to plan long in advance. And I've gotten it one time, and other runners of the game didn't believe me that it was you could interrupt until it happened to somebody else.
I think it was caeshura, actually.
I think it was caeshura,
that got the interrupt.
So, lore update, since we have a little bit of time for it. After killing Nox, Umbra shows up, and she's pretty upset that you've killed both of her daughters, Cordelia and Nox. So she kind of tries to make a deal with you. Give up the sun, the moon, and the stars, or I'll kill your father. And Aurora kind of painfully decides to keep the sun, the moon, and the stars to kind of protect the people of Lemuria, and loses her father in the process. And then with her father gone, her crown loses its power, and Umbra is able to hurt Aurora, and then Aurora dies again. But it's okay. Aurora's brought back up to the altar. Your mother plays a song that raises the dead, I guess. And here we have Aurora being revived again.
Got all kinds of, spirit energy going on between your friends, too.
I guess they're powering up for a spirit bomb. I don't know. And with the power of the sun, the moon, and the stars, Aurora kind of levels up again and gets a little bit older, gets a nice new dress, gets a nice new crown. Oh, and surprise, that old lady from the start of the game, that was actually your mother. And the former queen of Lemuria.
I believe this cutscene is considerably, well, maybe not considerably, but noticeably longer when you have more characters with you.
I think this is where caeshura is describing a ritual that we have.
Yes.
So if everybody wants to type out "pray for no prey," that's something we like to do for the final boss, because there are enemies in this fight that have an ability called Prey, and it is really nasty, and we don't want to see too many of them.
Because it both does a bunch of damage and also causes setback.
Yeah, it hits everybody. It's a knockback. Yeah, it just does a bunch of damage. But this is 100%, so we're a little bit safer than we would be in any percent, just by the virtue of having more HP.
And this is the final boss, by the way, too. I think it's a little unfortunate that this game's on the abrupt side, that kind of go you're kind of led on to think that you're going to that castle in the background to have your final showdown with Queen Umbra, but instead you just end up fighting her in the sky in front of it. And
yeah, it does seem like they rushed a little bit, but it's still a really good final fight. Mm-hmm. Basically, our strategy is going to be we actually equipped with Oangus an oculi that gives his abilities, his attacks, the light property, and these nasty looking birds are very much weak to it. So we are going to cast Taunt to get everybody to focus Oangus, and then we're just going to buff up Oangus and have him go to town.
I believe there actually was a glitch she could have done in order to get into the menu in between the Nox and Umbra fights, but it's been, I guess, routed out as far as not being necessary.
Yeah, it ends up basically being a wash in terms of time. The reason why we would do that is we could prep for Nox and then again prep for Umbra in terms of setting up equipment.
Yeah, because Nox is weak to lightning and then Umbra is weak to light.
Right.
So you could theoretically do more damage to both bosses by changing out your weapon oculi.
Right. But it ends up, you have to close out of the game and then load it back up. So it ends up kind of taking about as much time as it saves. So
and then Umbra has an interrupt counter that's pretty harmless because all it does is buff her own attack.
Yeah, and the buffs don't even stack, so it's not even like something you have to worry about where she buffs herself a million times and then she like one-shots you. But we're coming up pretty close to time. We don't end the time right when the final boss dies. We wait for a little bit there's a little cutscene after the final boss, and then we use our timing method to end there. But look, all this damage we're doing, because Aurora and Oangus are so boosted in terms of their stats, we just get through this final fight really quickly.
And that's it.
And GG to caeshura. So I think she's looking at her time and kind of being a little disappointed. So she had a 1:42.47, just to give a little bit of compare it to my run, which happens to be the best time on record, a 1:42.11. So just about 30 seconds shy of getting the world record in a marathon. I think that's a pretty good run.
Yeah. Like, what was your time at RPG Limit Break for this category?
It was like a 1:45, or it was a few minutes. It took a few minutes longer.
Yeah, I do remember I think you had some issues doing the duplication.
Yeah, the duplication for Cordelia didn't go quite as planned, so I didn't have quite the stats I wanted to. And I think there was something else, probably the Griffin fight, that probably went a little off. So this was a really, really solid run.
Yeah, this was a good run. Judging by the sign she's waving, hopefully this isn't the last we'll see of her running this game in Category 2.
I really do hope caeshura takes the world record from me, at least for 100%. She definitely can do that. Her time is pretty close to mine. If she wants my any percent time, though, she's going to have to work for that. So I would fully encourage her to do so. It is very beatable. So caeshura and I are quite close friends. We both kind of started our speedrunning career off of Child of Light, and she made it a point of hers to be my eternal rival. We have a little bit of a nice rivalry with Child of Light here. But yeah, GG again.
Close off the story with one last lore update before we take off too.
Sure. So, kind of lore update at the end. We defeat the evil queen. We save the people of Lemuria. And the floods that I mentioned earlier in Austria, we go through that magic mirror and then save the people of Austria too from being flooded over and bring them to Lemuria to be safe, and everybody kind of lives happily in Lemuria. And Aurora takes her place to be the queen of Lemuria, and her mother just kind of drifts off because her mother has, I don't know, her mother just leaves.
Yeah. And I guess with that, yeah, if you enjoyed that, definitely give caeshura a follow. She runs this game along with quite a few others too, both kind of old and new RPGs and kind of puzzly games alike.
If you're interested in the Child of Light speedrun, there is information on the speedrun.com board for Child of Light. We do have a Discord. caeshura and I are, of course, very welcoming. We have a few other runners at various levels that would be happy to get other people into running the game. It's a pretty good RPG to pick up. It's short. It's a cheap game. And I
think it falls into that really nice speed game category too, where it's pretty easy to pick up. It has a decently high skill ceiling if you really want to compete for a top time.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much, Puetzel and Takaze. That was wonderful. I mean, that was